Fireflies by Joshua Berthelette. It was late, the world still and quiet. They sat together on the edge of the mountain, the cool night air brushing softly against their faces. The skyline of Georgia stretched out before them, dotted with distant lights. And above them, the sky was a velvet black. In the distance, a sliver of moon cast a faint glow on the landscape. But it was the fireflies that caught their attention. They had always loved this view, even before everything had begun to fade. The fireflies, tiny sparks of light dancing in the night, were a beautiful distraction, their delicate flashes like brief moments of life that lingered only for a heartbeat before vanishing. It had always felt magical, but tonight it felt like something else. She leaned into him, her presence warm against the chill. Her hair was soft in the moonlight, but it was more than her appearance that made his heart ache tonight. It was the way she was fading, how her form was less defined, as if she were already becoming one with the night. She knew it, and so did he, but they said nothing about it. They never had to. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, and the silence between them felt like a deep understanding. They hadn't spoken much these days. There was no need for words. They had already shared so much, more than they ever could have imagined when they first met, back when he had moved into her home. A stranger who had become the love of her life. He had known then that time with her would be limited. But that didn't matter. They had always known, deep down, that love had its own rhythm. It wasn't about the length, but the depth. They'd traveled together, experienced places she'd always dreamed of visiting, movies, theme parks, Stone Mountain, and finally, New York City, her heart's last wish. And now they were back here, in the quiet of their hometown, surrounded by memories of the life they'd lived. Together, in the distance, a few more fireflies blinked in the air, rising and falling like delicate stars. He caught her gaze, and for a moment she seemed so present, her smile as vivid as ever. She had always loved the fireflies, had always believed they carried magic with them. She would tell him they were tiny pieces of the universe, flashes of light trying to find their way home. But now, as he sat next to her, her body was almost translucent, her edges softening with each passing day. She was slipping away, slowly but gracefully. Her eyes, still the same deep brown, held a wisdom that only the truly lost can understand. And in her silence, he found a peace he couldn't quite explain. Finally, she spoke. "Do you remember the movie we watched?" Her voice was faint, but it was still hers. The words drifted like a whisper in the air. He nodded. Coraline. Her favorite movie, of her movie. The one about a world that seemed better, but came with its own dark cost. He had always loved how much it resonated with her, how she'd found meaning in the ending. He'd never told her, but it made him think about their own journey, how, no matter how much they wanted, they couldn't escape the reality of time. There was no other world for them, only this one, with its fleeting moments. "Yes," he said quietly. "I remember." She smiled, her form flickering for a brief second like one of the fireflies. "It's funny," she said, almost to herself, and how we can want something so badly, but we always have to come back to the real world. They both sat in silence for a long time, watching the fireflies, until the night swallowed them whole. The wind had grown cooler, and he could feel the slight absence in the air, the space where her warmth had once been. But still, they sat together, breathing in the night, finding comfort in the quiet. He glanced at her again, and she was almost gone now. The last flicker of light from the fireflies was fading in the distance. She didn't respond when he called her name. Slowly, he turned his gaze back to the stars and stood. The bench creaked as he stood up, leaving her behind, her presence already fading into the shadows. He took one last look, then slowly began to walk away, the gravel beneath his feet crunching in the quiet night. Each step felt heavier than the last, but then, after a few steps, he stopped. Something inside him pulled him back. He turned and looked toward the bench, where she had been sitting, where she was no longer. His throat tightened, and he felt the weight of the world in the simple words. "I love you," he whispered softly into the night, to no one but her.